The morning of February 23, 2026 started with a mist so thick it seemed to swallow the very spires of Westminster. In London, people were just starting their commutes unaware that behind the heavy stone walls of Buckingham Palace, the very foundation of the British monarchy was being dismantled. At exactly 9:07 a.m., a statement was released. It wasn't the usual fluff about royal engagements or charity galas. It was stiff, it was clinical, and it was devastating. Prince William, acting with the full authority of the Crown and the King's Privy Council, had officially rejected the DNA evidence provided by his brother, Prince Harry. This wasn't just a family spat played out in the tabloids, this was a declaration of constitutional war. For the first time in centuries, the legitimacy of royal children was being questioned not by internet trolls, but by the future king himself. The world stopped. Media outlets from New York to Tokyo scrambled to decode the legal jargon, but the message was clear. William had drawn a line in the ancient stone of British law. He wasn't just throwing away a piece of paper, he was challenging the bloodline itself. Harry had offered what he thought was a scientific olive branch, a DNA report intended to prove once and for all that Archie and Lilibet were his biological heirs. But William didn't see an olive branch. He saw a security breach. The future king made it known that no child, regardless of their parentage, would ever be allowed back into the sacred line of succession based on a private test from a California lab. He demanded a second test, one conducted under the direct, unquestionable authority of the UK's top forensic experts. This was no longer about family, it was about the integrity of the crown. But to understand why William reacted with such ice-cold precision, we have to look at the document that started it all. Just 1 week before the palace's royal freeze, a 72-page legal dossier had been hand-delivered to Clarence House. Harry's legal team had spent years compiling it, a desperate final attempt to end the exile and bring his children back into the royal fold. It was a document filled with the pain of a father who felt his children were being erased from history. Inside were genetic paternity tests from Horizon Gene Diagnostics, signed affidavits from Meghan Markle, and even ultrasound records from a high-end Beverly Hills clinic. On paper, it looked like an open and shut case. Harry wanted the safety and the titles he felt his children deserved. He was tired of the whispers, tired of the OD'd career prospects in America, and ready to come home. However, when William received that dossier, he didn't see a brother reaching out. He saw a web of inconsistencies that needed to be audited. Instead of a warm welcome, he called an emergency meeting of the Sovereign Succession Security Council. This is a group so secretive that most people don't even know it exists. It's made up of the nation's top legal minds, intelligence officers, and royal archivists. Their only job is to protect the bloodline. Within hours, they had flagged dozens of red flags in Harry's paperwork. The dossier that was supposed to be Harry's golden ticket quickly became the primary evidence for the prosecution. The palace didn't just reject the DNA, they opened a secret internal file that would soon become known as the Bloodline Files. What the investigators found inside those files was enough to shake even the most loyal royalists. The first major blow came from something called visual forensics. The Crown's media team, the same people who analyzed deepfakes and digital manipulation, went back to March 2019. They focused on 2 events Meghan attended on the same day. In the morning, photos showed a baby bump that was low-round and consistent with a late-stage pregnancy. But just 6 hours later, at a different event, the cameras caught something strange. Her midsection appeared smaller, higher, and most shockingly, it showed strange creases under her coat. The forensic team concluded these weren't the natural folds of skin, but the folding of synthetic material. Using cutting-edge 3D depth mapping, they proved that a biological pregnancy simply cannot change shape and mass that drastically in a single afternoon. The prosthetic rumors that had lived in the dark corners of the internet were suddenly being treated as credible evidence by the highest levels of the monarchy. But the visual anomalies were just the beginning. The files then pivoted to a massive breach of royal protocol that occurred during Archie's birth. For generations, royal births have been overseen by the medical guardians of the succession, top doctors like Dr. Guy Thorpe-Beeston and Sir Marcus Setchell. These men are the living link in an uninterrupted chain of certification. They were there for George, Charlotte, and Louis, but when Archie was born, they were nowhere to be found. Even more troubling was the total lack of hospital discharge data sent to the General Register Office. In the world of the British monarchy, if a birth isn't witnessed and recorded by the Crown's own officials, it legally didn't happen. It sounds archaic, but these are the rules that have kept the institution alive for 1,000 years. To William's counsel, this wasn't just a lapse in paperwork, it was proof of a coordinated cover-up. Then, there was the issue of the birth certificate itself. It's a well-known fact that Archie's certificate was altered a month after it was issued. Meghan's name was changed from Rachel Meghan Markle to her formal title. While the Sussex camp claimed the palace requested this for consistency, William's team pointed to a glaring double standard. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, is listed on all her children's certificates by her full legal name, Catherine Elizabeth Middleton. The investigators saw the alteration as a deliberate attempt to distance the document from the biological reality of the birth. Each small change was another red flag, but nothing prepared them for what the MI6 cyber cryptologists found next. Deep within the financial audits, they discovered a wire transfer that would change everything. On May 1, 2019, just 5 days before Archie's birth was announced, a company linked to the Sussexes sent an emergency payment of $499,000. The destination? A private reproductive health clinic in Tijuana, Mexico. This specific clinic is world-renowned for one thing: high-end total privacy gestational surrogacy. The encrypted data even mentioned a non-disclosure agreement between the clinic and a third party. To the intelligence officers at Buckingham Palace, this was the financial footprint they had been looking for. The implication was seismic. If Archie was born via a surrogate in Mexico, while Meghan was appearing pregnant in London, the legal consequences would be absolute. The British monarchy operates under a strict common law principle from the 17th century, born of the body. This law was designed specifically to prevent succession fraud during times of palace intrigue. It states that any child not physically born to the royal mother is instantly and legally removed from the line of succession. It doesn't matter if the child is biologically the prince's. If the royal wife didn't give birth to them herself, they cannot be heirs to the throne. This law has never been repealed. It is the steady support structure of the entire system. And with the Tijuana discovery, Harry's children were standing on very shaky ground. As the Bloodline Files grew, so did the palace's resolve. They turned their attention back to Harry's original DNA test from Santa Barbara. They quickly discovered that the chain of custody had been compromised. The samples had been delivered by a courier who was a close associate of Meghan's, meaning there was no way to prove the samples hadn't been tampered with. Furthermore, the lab itself wasn't accredited by the Royal College of Pathologists. It was a test designed for optics, not for the rigorous standards of royal law. This was confirmed when a leaked email from Harry's own lawyer surfaced, stating they needed something that looked unimpeachable on paper, because the palace would only see the documents. It was a devastating blow to Harry's credibility. In response to these findings, William did something unprecedented. He activated the Royal Commission for Lineal Ethics and Continuity, or the RLEC. This is the monarchy's doomsday weapon, a committee that only meets when the very survival of the family line is at stake. The panel included retired judges, MI6 officers, and constitutional historians. Their job wasn't just to check DNA. It was to determine if Archie and Lilibet met the moral and ceremonial standards of the crown. At the same time, a private memo from King Charles was unsealed. It showed a father torn between his love for his grandchildren and his duty to the throne. Charles had given his reluctant approval to deny recognition to any child not born under verified conditions. The threshold of trust had been crossed, and there was no going back. The Sussex camp didn't take this lying down. Meghan's lawyers immediately filed a motion in the High Court, calling the investigation a custodial coup. They argued that as dual citizens, the children were protected by international law. They accused the palace of institutional violence and a genetic witch hunt. Meghan even released a viral video titled The Eraser, where she spoke directly to the camera, her voice shaking with emotion as she claimed the palace was obsessed with blood purity. It was a brilliant piece of emotional warfare, but in the cold rooms of the RLEC, emotions didn't count for much. They were looking for facts, and the facts were looking grim. The climax of this dynastic struggle happened in the early hours of February 14th. Prince Harry, in a final desperate gamble, landed a private jet at RAF Northolt. He wasn't met by family, but by the king's private secretary and the head of the royal medical household. He had brought the children with him, ready to submit to the palace's own tests. They were whisked away to a lockdown floor of King Edward VII's hospital. For hours, the world waited as geneticists and high court judges oversaw the collection of samples. Harry looked exhausted, a man who had traveled across an ocean to save his children's future only to find himself in a clinical fortress. By 4:16 p.m., the tests were done. The results were delivered to the King and Prince William in a red leather binder. The findings were a paradox. The DNA confirmed with 99.09% certainty that Harry was the biological father. In any other family, that would be the end of the story. But in the House of Windsor, it was just the beginning of the end. The RLEC concluded that while the children were biologically Harry's, the inconsistent evidence surrounding their births meant they failed to meet the standards set by the Bill of Rights of 1689. The money trail to Mexico, the missing medical records, and the visual anomalies created a constitutional void. William didn't hesitate. He pushed for the immediate withdrawal of their titles and their removal from the line of succession. He saw it as a necessary if painful surgery to save the institution. King Charles, however, sought a middle ground. He didn't want the Bloodline Files to go public and destroy what was left of his family's reputation. That night, he sent Harry a handwritten note. It offered a letter's patent of abeyance. The titles of Prince and Princess would be suspended indefinitely. Archie and Lilibet would no longer be part of the line of succession. Harry was given a choice stay in the UK and raise his children as private citizens without titles, or return to America and have those titles permanently erased. It was a checkmate. Harry had used an emotional argument in a constitutional fight, and the monarchy had responded with the cold, precise power of the law. As he looked out the window at the silhouette of Windsor Castle, he realized the truth. He hadn't lost because of a lack of love. He had lost to 1,000 years of rules that didn't care about his feelings. His children were his by blood, but they would never be his by the crown. The sword had fallen, and the House of Windsor had closed its ranks, leaving Harry and his family on the outside looking in. The silence that followed the king's decision was perhaps more deafening than the announcement itself. In the small, high-security lodge in Windsor, where Harry and the children were being held, the air felt thick with a sense of sudden, irreversible loss. Those who were present described the Duke as a man who had finally run out of moves. For years, he had operated under the belief that the truth, his truth, would eventually be enough to bridge the gap between his new life in California and the ancient world he had left behind. But in the cold light of a British February, he realized that truth is a flexible concept in the halls of power. It wasn't about whether Archie and Lilibet were his children. It was about whether they were royal enough for a system that was currently fighting for its own survival. William, meanwhile, remained ensconced at Adelaide Cottage just a few miles away, yet worlds apart in terms of his perspective. To the Prince of Wales, this wasn't an act of cruelty, it was an act of preservation. He had watched as the institution was battered by scandal after scandal, from the controversies surrounding his uncle to the constant barrage of media leaks from the Sussex camp. To William, the Bloodline Files were a necessary audit of the crown's most valuable asset, its legitimacy. He believed that if the rules of succession could be bent for one person, the entire structure would eventually collapse. He was building what palace insiders began to call the clipped wing monarchy, a smaller, tighter, and far more scrutinized circle that left no room for ambiguity or digital manipulation. The global fallout was instantaneous and fractured. In the United States, the reaction was one of pure outrage. The narrative of a cold, out-of-touch monarchy attacking two innocent children because of a legal technicality played perfectly into the American spirit of rebellion. Social media was flooded with clips from Meghan's The Eraser video, which became a rallying cry for those who saw the palace's move as a form of institutional bullying. But back in the UK, the mood was more complicated. While many felt for Harry as a father, there was a growing sense of fatigue. The public had been through years of he said, she said, and for many the scientific and legal precision of the palace's report offered a grim kind of closure. The born-of-the-body law, as archaic as it seemed, gave the British public a clear rule to follow in a world that felt increasingly chaotic. Deep within the red leather binder of the final report, there was one detail that the public never saw: a secret clause known as the hereditary waiver. It was a final quiet offer from the king to his younger son. It suggested that if Harry were to formally renounce his own place in the line of succession and agree to a total media blackout for the next decade, the crown might reconsider the children's status once they reached the age of majority. It was a way out, but it came at the price of Harry's entire identity. It was a test of what Harry valued more, his voice in the world or his children's place in a world that had clearly rejected them. The final hours of Harry's stay in London were marked by a clinical, almost business-like atmosphere. There were no grand farewells, no tearful reconciliations over tea at the palace. Instead, there were legal documents to sign and travel manifests to finalize. As the Range Rovers pulled away from King Edward VII Hospital, heading back toward the military runway at RAF Northolt, the royal freeze was in full effect. The children Archie and Lilibet were seen being carried into the cars shielded from the cameras by heavy black umbrellas. They were children of a prince, but in the eyes of the British state, they were now ghost citizens of a distant land, with a heritage that had been officially suspended in abeyance. As the Gulfstream jet took off into the gray London sky heading west toward the Atlantic, the realization hit home for everyone involved. The House of Windsor had successfully defended its walls, but at the cost of its heart. William had secured the future of the crown, ensuring that the line of succession remained unimpeachable on paper. But he had also ensured that the rift with his brother would likely never heal. The Bloodline Files were locked away in the royal archives, where they would remain a secret to all but a few. The king reportedly spent that evening alone in the gardens of Highgrove. He had chosen the crown over his own flesh and blood, a decision that has haunted every monarch since the beginning of time. He knew that history would judge him, some would see him as a strong leader who protected the integrity of the throne, while others would see a grandfather who let his own descendants be erased. But in the world of the royals, there is no middle ground. There is only the line and the weight of the crown that keeps it straight. The saga of the Sussex children and the Bloodline Files will go down as one of the most controversial chapters in the history of the modern monarchy. It was a battle fought with DNA 3D mapping and 17th century laws, a collision of the digital age and the ancient world. And as the dust settles, one truth remains in the Game of Thrones: biology is only half the battle. The other half is the permission of the king, and that permission had been finally denied.